Hey everybody, welcome back to Double O Wasteland, where I'm watching the Bond films in chronological order. I'm Greg. This time we're taking a look at 1965's Thunderball. Trigger warning for violence, sharks, sexual assault, drowning, and eye patches. Sean Connery returns once again as James Bond.
Mr. Bond. Oh yes, Mr. Bond.
This time our Bond girl is Claudine Auger, playing Domino.
My dear uncooperative Domino.
How do you know that? How do you know my friends call me Domino?
Our villain is the perfectly serviceable Largo, played to perfection by Adolfo Celi. He is, of course, infamously parodied by Robert Wagner as Number 2 in Austin Powers.
His name, Number 2, face of my evil empire.
Luciana Paluzzi plays the femme fatale and assassin Fiona, and, side note, has one of the lamest deaths thus far in the series. In addition, we have Lois Montgomery returning as Moneypenny.
Dashing figure. I don't suppose that has anything to do with your request.
Bernard Lee returning as M.
And I'll thank you not to refer to me as the old man.
And Desmond Llewellyn returning as Q.
Oh no.
007.
What a wonderful surprise.
Well, for me too.
Thunderball focuses once again on the machinations of Spectre, as the yet-to-be-revealed Blofeld instructs Largo / Number 2 to hijack a NATO plane with atomic bombs in order to hold the countries hostage for a vast sum of money.
My dear Prime Minister, atomic bombs which were aboard NATO Flight 759 are now in the possession of Spectre. Unless within the next 7 days your government pays to us £100 million sterling.
Of course, James Bond isn't going to let this happen, and through yet another Caribbean adventure, a fuckload of scuba, and of course some good old-fashioned underwater sex, he manages to stop Spectre before they blow up Miami. As I mentioned in the last video, I saw most of the old Bond movies as a child, and much like Goldfinger, before even starting Thunderball, I was feeling the stirrings of emotion. But unlike Goldfinger, it wasn't lament or wistfulness. No, the moment I saw the title card for Thunderball, I immediately felt bored.
More like Borophyll!
I remember not really liking this movie as a kid, to the point I would just leave about halfway through, and I'm willing to admit that part of that could be just me thinking, how's this guy gonna have an eye patch and not be a pirate?
You are not a pirate.
But maybe younger me was onto something, because watching this movie as an adult, I gotta say, Thunderball sucks.
Whoa, I think I just figured something out, Beavis. What? This sucks.
Anyway, we've been streaming Wasteland. You can find us at... Okay, just kidding. Thunderball isn't a great movie, and it suffers from 3 very different issues, and I'll cover each of them, of course. But the main and biggest one is that this is very much a movie of its time. And because I'm relatively certain this term is going to come up a few more times over the next dozen films, it's worth explaining what I mean by it. When I'm calling out a movie being of its time, I'm using the term to highlight a couple different things, the main ones being cultural attitudes and filmmaking focus. Each of these things are probably worthy of their own deep dive, but that's not going to happen here. Instead, I just want to highlight some examples, starting with this early scene.
Behave yourself, Mr. Bond.
James forcibly grabs this woman and kisses her. She is clearly not into it. This is pretty textbook sexual assault, prosecutable in many places, and an action that would be widely criticized if performed by a hero now. However, in what original reviews I could access, this isn't mentioned at all, because acknowledgement of such acts as sexual assault was very low at the time. In fact, if you were to talk to people who were alive in 1964, 1965, which is not impossible as it was only 58 years ago, I wouldn't be surprised if you heard phrases like, "that's how it used to be," and "back when men were men," and in case it's not abundantly clear, we don't support either of these backwards ideologies. And to add to this idea that this kind of behavior was just considered okay, after Bond has his way with this attendant, we just move on. The story, for what there is of it, just continues. Now, there are a bunch of you who are thinking or typing or talking over the video right now saying something along the lines of, "Well, that's how James Bond movies are," or "that is how it used to be," etc. But that's exactly what I mean by cultural attitudes. Society used to be a lot more horrifyingly nonchalant about this kind of assault. And try as we might, we can't separate ourselves from our current culture very easily. These trespasses over what now is obviously viewed as wrong, that are so common in older movies, will always seem off to anyone who lives in a society that's changed. You can choose to ignore it, move past it, or call it out in a film review, but you can't deny that the scene exists and that it's not in line with modern conventions, thus adding to the of-its-time nature of the film. Art is reflective of the culture that's created in, and film is art, so it's not hard to link the filmmaking focus in any movie to the cultural attitudes and interests of the time. Thunderball demonstrates this by dedicating a full 19% of its 2-hour and 10-minute runtime to dialogueless underwater shots. The mid-60s were a time where there was a renewed interest in exploration, spurred on by things like the space race and Jacques Cousteau's Academy Award-winning World Without Sun the year previously. Undersea exploration had fascinated many at the time, and Terrence Young, the director of Thunderball, really leaned into the obsession. Many of the old reviews do talk about how beautiful the ocean looks in Technicolor, showing that in its day the amount of undersea footage was appreciated and even praised. However, we live in 2023. I can find hours of underwater exploration footage without getting up from my couch. It can be argued that we're over-spectacleized and too much of the wonder of this world is conveniently available for us to explore anytime the urge strikes us. But that deeply lessens the wow factor of these shots, and instead leaves us focused on what they're actually showing us, which is generally just people doing scuba and sometimes fighting. The novelty was appreciated in its time, but sitting here as a modern viewer, it's less impressive to see, and it generally feels like it actually detracts from the story, another marker of the of-its-time factor. Now, it's not impossible to appreciate 1960s films, as movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Psycho, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Bonnie and Clyde, and Dr. Strangelove are all products of the 60s, and each of these is considered a classic in their own right. But I'm not here trying to look at movie making over time or extol the virtues of films from a specific era. I'm reviewing James Bond movies as an almost 40-year-old in 2024, and like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty impossible to separate oneself from the world as a whole. As a result, Thunderball comes off as extremely dated and out of place in 21st century. Aside from all that, there are two other things that drag Thunderball down, one of which being the incredibly bad ending sequence. After we move past 5 full minutes of underwater fighting between the US and agents of Spectre, we find James breaking into the speedboat piloted by Largo as he attempts to escape from the Navy with Domino, and I just have to call out the terrible green screening here. There's no way that boat didn't crash. But more importantly, James, Largo, and a crew member struggle for a couple minutes in a chaotic boat fight, only to have a guy named Coots, who is barely in the film in any meaningful way, save Domino.
Please talk to them for me. Tell them that I only did what I had to do, what I was told to do.
Domino then runs upstairs and spears Largo in the back, and that's that. It feels rushed and hackish, especially after we've seen Goldfinger get sucked out an airplane window in the previous movie. Moreover, it highlights that both Largo himself and Thunderball's version of Spectre wasn't much of an adversary for Bond. I mean, Largo and Fiona were even wearing matching rings with their supervillain logo on it. It's not exactly the pinnacle of a secret underground cabal of evilness.
And when did you find out?
Oh, you're wearing the same ring as Largo.
It's a ring I like to wear.
Vanity has its dangers.
But at least Fiona posed some risk to Bond. She was seductive and cunning, openly mocking him to his face.
Of course, I forgot your ego, Mr. Bond. James Bond, who only has to make love to a woman and she starts to hear heavenly choir singing. She repents and immediately returns to the side of right and virtue. But not this one.
And as we mentioned earlier, she ends up dying in an incredibly boring and unexciting manner, and this movie fittingly ends the same way. And this segues easily into the third big flaw with Thunderball. The movie is plotting in all the wrong ways. It seems like the movie sometimes just forgets that it has a story to tell, and then rushes to fill in the action when it remembers. It's like having a friend describe a wild night at a bar by spending 15 minutes describing the bar, and then in one sentence telling you about the machete-wielding maniac who burst through the door. In the case of Thunderball, the friend telling the story is director Terrence Young, whose movies are frequently criticized as being poorly paced. I've been critical of Old Terry before, but my objections were about individual scenes that lingered too long. Here, there are entire segments of the movie that feel like they could have been left in the editing room. For example, the 7 minutes we spend following Bond around the health club serves no real purpose except to A. Let us know that James can in fact get bruises, B. Remind us that Spectre still wants to kill Bond. You can see one of Spectre's masterful assassination attempts here, quick warning for loud noises and shaky cam.
Nice to have met you, Mr. Bond.
Hey, what the hell? Hey! Hey, come on! Hey!
Ostensibly, this entire sequence is for Bond to happen upon the body of the pilot that Spectre is impersonating, but that could have been done much faster with less backstretching peril and general sexual assault. And maybe this wouldn't stand out as much if the rest of the movie was paid such lavish care, but our climactic fight between Largo and Bond is a mere 2 minutes of runtime at the end of the movie. We spend almost as long as the health club as we do watching James escape Fiona in a Junkanoo parade. In many ways, this almost feels like some kind of weird promotional video for the Bahamas with the spy story attached. For all my negativity, there's a few positive elements for Thunderball. Of all of the villain plans thus far, it's the most plausible, at least in the sense of this would actually do something.
Yes, that is a word, and the joke does make sense.
Sean Connery delivers another great performance as Bond, wisecracking his way through the movie, and there's a motherfucking jetpack. I wish this jetpack would have gotten used more in the movie, but hey, at least Bond has one interesting gadget. Unfortunately for this outing, the gear Q delivers him is pretty boring. A Geiger counter, watch,
A Geiger counter.
A tiny rebreather.
Now, in the event of a rebreather not being available, you can use this device. For short periods only, of course, say about 4 minutes.
And an underwater camera.
Everything you give me.
Treated with equal contempt. Yes, I know, but that's an underwater camera.
It's another spot where the film could have added some pizzazz, but instead focused on the mundane, which I guess is fine, but it feels unfulfilling. I don't think anybody watches James Bond for their realistic depiction of spying. Anyway, let's jump to the scorecard. Kill count. It's actually low here, about 25 or so, mostly in the final underwater battle. It is hard to tell if he's killed some of these scuba divers, or if he's just disconnecting their breathing apparatus, forcing them to retreat to the surface. Body count. We get a 3 with a nebulous 4th. There's another agent and or secretary in the movie, Paula, who is never shown to sleep with Bond, but based on how willing Bond is to just grab a woman near him when the mood strikes, who can say for sure? Villain. C? B-? Largo himself is fine, Fiona is a good femme fatale, but they don't inject any urgency into the film, nor do they stand out like Goldfinger. Prior to watching this movie, I actually had to remind myself who the villain was, because I had forgotten Largo entirely. Best one-liner?
think you got the point.
Theme song. Big ol' F. Look no further than the theme song to let you know how dull this movie is going to be. It's the kind of song I refer to as a green eggs and ham song, which is to say you can replace the lyrics pretty easily with the words to green eggs and ham, and it's honestly kind of better.
While other men just talk, he looks at this world and wants it all. So he strikes like Thunderball.
He will not eat them with a goat. He will not eat them on a boat. He will not eat them, Sam I am. He will not eat green eggs and ham. Final score. 003 out of 007. There's very little reason to go back and watch Thunderball at all. I didn't give Dr. No a score because I was still trying to figure out formatting for the series, but I probably would have given it a 3 as well. I'm sure your older relative or zealous friend will try to tell you that I'm a fucking moron and that Thunderball is one of the greatest movies of all time, etc., etc. And to that I say, have you seen it recently? Seriously, have you actually sat down, watched it, paid attention the whole way through, didn't fuck around on your phone, didn't get interrupted? I didn't think so. True Lies is 10 minutes longer than this movie and 10 times more entertaining. I could only recommend this one to completionists and purists. Anyway, I've been Greg for Streaming Wasteland. We release new episodes every Monday of the year. Go find us on Spotify, on iTunes, on Amazon Podcasts, and anywhere else that podcasts are distributed. You can find us on all the various social medias. We're Streaming Wasteland. Drop us a line at streamingwasteland@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for listening. And much like James Bond, we will return. Next will be You Only Live Twice, a movie I'm not 100% sure I've actually seen. I'm pretty sure I have, but it doesn't look familiar. Until next time.